In this video, I'll be talking about quadratic equations. A quadratic equation in one variable is an equation that can be written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0. This is in standard form. We always want it to be equal to 0 to start with. And the condition is a, b, and c are real numbers. So they can be any numbers where a can be equal to 0. And the reason is if a equals 0, this term is going to disappear. And we're going to have a bx plus c equal to 0. And that's what we call the linear equation. So always have it equal to 0 and go from there. And a quadratic equation for this class, we'll be using 4 different methods to solve a quadratic equation. We have factoring, quadratic formula, the square root property, and completing the square. We'll see each one of those one by one, but for this video, I'll be talking about a quadratic formula. So if we have a quadratic equation that's written in this form, for example, if we have 2x squared plus 2x minus 11 equal to 1, is this a quadratic equation? Well, first of all, it's a quadratic equation. I have the ax squared term, the bx term here, and the constant. I have to make this 0 by moving this over to the left. So you subtract 1 to make the right side equal to 0. So if I subtract 1, I get a 2x squared plus 2x minus 12 is equal to 0. Now, that's a quadratic equation, and you can always simplify the numbers. That is, reduce the numbers, or you can keep it the way it is if you want. So if it was me, I would simplify this by dividing all the terms by 2 on all the sides. So that gets you x squared plus x minus 6 is equal to the number 0, and that's what we call the standard form for this part of the equation. Now, the quadratic formula is whenever you have a quadratic equation, you can solve it by the following formula here. The quadratic formula says that the solution x is going to be equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of your b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So everything over 2a. So once you have the quadratic equation in standard form, label your ABC. Now, from that equation right above here, what is my ABC? Well, if you go back to the original definition right here, your A comes before the x squared, the B comes before the term x, and the C is the constant number. So, going back right here, my A is the number that comes before x squared. So in this case, there is no number here, meaning that A is equal to 1. B is the number that comes before x. In this case, again, it's positive 1. And my C term is negative 6. So once you label that, we can use the quadratic formula. That is, the solution can be written as x equals my negative b, so that is negative of my b value, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 1 squared, minus 4 times your a value times your c value. And then all over 2 times your a value. Again, my a value is 1. Let's see if we can simplify this. So this simplifies into x equals negative 1 plus or minus inside the radical. 1 squared is 1. And then if you notice here, a negative 4 times 1 times negative 6, that will change into a positive value because negative and negative makes positive. 4 times 1 is 4, times 6 is 24. All over 2 times 1 is 2. So that equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 24 and 1 makes 25 divided by 2. Which of course that simplifies into negative 1 plus or minus square root of 25 is 5 over 2, and again plus minus means we have a negative 1 plus 5 divided by 2, which equals positive 4 over 2 equals 2. That's one answer. Or the other one would be x equals negative 1 minus 5 divided by 2. That's what it means by plus minus. One with a plus, one with a minus, which equals negative 6 over 2. That simplifies into a negative 3. So this quadratic equation has two answers, as we can see. Now, a quadratic equation can have a maximum of two answers. That's due to the exponent here. That exponent tells you the maximum solution you can have. And it doesn't mean you can always have two answers. Sometimes you're going to run into no solution, one solution, and two solution. So for this problem, we have two solution. And you can always check, plug it in. So let's check here. Original problem was 2x squared plus 2x minus 11 equals 1. If x equals positive 2, what do we get for the two sides? Well, 2, replace x by 2, square it, plus 2 times your x value, minus 11. Is this equal to positive 1? Well, 2 squared is 4, times 2 is 8, so this right here gives you an 8, plus that changes into a 4, minus 11. 8 plus 4 is 12, minus 11 equals 1. And this does work. So you can always check your solution just to be sure. So this formula should always work when you try to solve a quadratic equation. So you can always use it if it doesn't say use that specific method. For the next problem, we'll see at the following problem. So example 2, let's say we have 12x squared equals x plus 1. Now, this equation right here is not in standard form because it's not equal to 0. But we know how to make it equal to 0. You just undo the steps here. So subtract x, subtract 1, subtract x, subtract 1 to both sides. This cancels, that cancels. Right side you get a 0. Over here I always tend to write the highest exponent first and then go down from there. So put them in order basically. Now this is in standard form because it's equal to 0. Now once you have it equal to 0, you can label your ABC. A equals the number before x squared. B equals the number before the x term. In this case it's a minus here, so that's a minus 1. My C equals negative 1. So A, B, C, once you put them in order. And of course we can solve this using the quadratic formula, which according to the quadratic formula it's negative b. So it's the negative of my b value. Since b is negative, I'll put it in parentheses, plus or minus the square root of b squared. So again, negative 1 to the second, minus 4 times my a value times my c value, divided by 2 times your a value. Now let's try to simplify this. X equals negative and negative makes positive, so that changes into a positive 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 squared is 1, and then a minus and a minus will make a positive. 4 times 12 is 48, times 1 is 48, divided by 24. Now let's go to the next step. That is, let's see if we can simplify this. 1 plus or minus the square root of, inside the radical, if I combine those two, I get a 49, divided by 24. So x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 49 is 7, divided by 24. Okay, which then this equals, plus minus means you have two ways of writing this. So you have 1 plus 7 divided by 24, or 1 minus 7 divided by 24, which equals 1 plus 7 is 8 divided by 24, and this one is negative 6 divided by 24. And let's reduce this. This simplifies into 8 goes into 8 once, 8 goes into 24 3 times. So that's 1/3. And then over here, 6 goes into 6 once, and then 6 goes into 24 4 times. So that's 1/4. Again, this one has two solutions, as we can have a maximum of 2 answers. Let me solve a third problem here. And for this one, let's use, let's see what equation I can use. Let's try to do this problem here. So example 3, let's work on x squared minus 8x plus 9 equal to 0. So this is automatically in standard form. So my a is 1, b is equal to negative 8, and c is equal to positive 9. And of course your a, b, c, those numbers are the front of x squared, number before the x term, and the constant number. And of course after you make it equal to 0. So make sure it's equal to 0 first before you can label your ABC. Next part would be to use the quadratic formula. And according to the quadratic formula, it goes negative b, so it's the negative of your b value, plus minus the square root of your b value, square, minus 4 times your a times your c value, divided by 2 times your a value. Let's continue. Negative and negative makes positive 8, plus minus square root of, that's 64 minus 36, divided by 2 times 1 is 2. Alright, so how do we simplify this? Well, 8 plus or minus the square root of 64 minus 36 is equal to 28 divided by 2. Now, I can try to simplify this a little bit more. 28 can be written as 4 times 7. So we'll change that into 4 times 7 divided by 2. And the reason I wrote that is 4 is a perfect square. That is, you can take the square root of 4 and get a 2. So this would be written as 8 plus or minus the square root of 4 times the square root of 7 divided by 2. That is, you can break this into the square root of 4 and the square root of 7. Now, if we continue here, the square root of 4 is equal to the number 2. And then with square root of 7, I can't simplify it, so I'll just leave it as that and divide it by 2. How can I simplify this? Well, this can be written as 8 over 2 plus or minus 2 root 7 over the number 2. That is, the 2 can be written as that, the bottom 2. 8 over 4, 8 over 2 simplifies into a 4 plus or minus. This 2 cancels with that 2. So we're left with square root of 7. So your answer is 4 plus or minus root 7. That is, you have 4 plus root 7 and 4 minus root 7 as your answer, so you can just leave it as that. That is the quadratic equation.